Today we're doing a layman's comparison of the Asus ProArt 6K display to Apple's Pro Display XDR. They say comparison is the theft of joy, so in today's video, we're stealing all of the joy of using the Asus ProArt 6K display by comparing it to the Pro Display. Seriously, in the next 10 minutes or so, you're going to hear me sound incredibly spoiled, and maybe rightfully so, with me nitpicking at two expensive computer screens. Aside from this being the most expensive video I've ever made to date, we're looking at the two displays' size, resolution, design, brightness and HDR capabilities, contrast, color accuracy, connectivity, ergonomics, and price. Even though resolution isn't everything, you get a good chunk of the Pro Display XDR's performance with this Asus 6K monitor, and even some things that the Pro Display doesn't have. That said, the XDR, as we will show, will still be the top of the line, because there are things other than a 6K resolution that matter on a computer screen. The Pro Display powers on quickly after you plug it in. No warm-up, no problems. In comparison, the ProArt by Asus takes roughly 5 to 8 seconds. First it gets up slowly, then it stretches, warms up, goes out for its morning coffee, and finally, it decides to let you know when it's ready to turn on. Why do I nitpick about this? I think people spend thousands of dollars on expensive PCs to make everyday tasks faster, and this is no exception. If you use a laptop and plug it and unplug it a few times a day, these seconds will add up, and the Pro Display is much faster at displaying an image. At the end of your ownership of this display, you will have spent a certain amount of hours in total just waiting for it to turn on. Here's a clip when I plug in both at the same time. The ProArt 6K is actually smaller than 32 inches, at 31.5 inches, but the size of the bezels actually makes the ProArt by Asus feel bigger than other screens, and you won't be thinking to yourself that the screen is too small. Its thickness is comparable to the Dell 4K, which also has a plastic shell. Both the ProArt and Dell screens are thin around the borders, thinner than the XDR, but then curve and have thick bulges in the middle. The XDR, in comparison, is a uniformly thin, engineered slab of glass and aluminum that's slightly thicker at the bezels, but maintains that thickness and doesn't have a thick bulge in the middle. In terms of panel size, I firmly believe 32 inches is one of the best sizes, and I've made a video explanation on why I think 32-inch screens are the best in this video here, detailing my productive office setup. Both screens have a resolution of 6016 by 3384, or 6K, which is leaps and bounds better than 4K. Even though both are 6K, they are not created equal. The 6K is sharper and much more satisfying on the Pro Display than on the Asus. The coating that Asus adds onto the screen is to blame for that. Asus adds what they call Lux Pixel to make the screen more paper-like, but that causes a loss of vividness. We'll talk more about the panel coatings and the panel materials soon in more detail. To be clear, the Asus 6K is still a substantial upgrade over other 4K displays, but side by side with the Pro Display XDR, you will feel like you're not getting the full effect of 6K. This is opposite to what I experienced with my Dell Thunderbolt 4K display, which made 4K feel better than 4K, thanks to its coating through black magic. That video review is available on my channel and is linked in the description. Regarding the refresh rates of both screens, despite the XDR being 5 years old, competitors are just now releasing similar 60Hz refresh rate displays, so I don't want to hear any arguments regarding the XDR's age. Both screens run at a maximum refresh rate of 60 Hz, and both run at custom lower refresh rates. The Pro Display XDR can run at 47.95, 48 Hz, 50, 59.94, and 60. The ProArt can adjust its frame rate for videos, but the only two options are 60 Hz and 30 Hz. Both screens have advertised 5 millisecond response times. If your refresh rate is 60 Hz, that means it takes 1/60th of a second to refresh the screen, which comes out to roughly 16.7 milliseconds per refresh. If you have a 120 Hz display, that's roughly 8.3 milliseconds. So both the Pro Display and ProArt displays both have sufficient response times. Even though the ProArt has a 6K resolution like the Pro Display by Apple, brightness is where the Pro Display showcases where a lot of the money goes when you spend the extra cheddar on a Pro Display versus the ProArt display. During typical usage, SDR usage, which is everyday usage, the XDR has an SDR brightness of 500 nits. When you're viewing HDR content, it's 1000 nits sustained or 1600 nits peak brightness when you have elements on the screen that don't take up the full display. You can install the app Vivid, which tricks macOS into thinking everything is HDR and lets you unlock that 1000 nit brightness for basically everything on screen. In contrast, the ProArt achieves only 80% of the sustained normal content brightness at a typical brightness of 400 nits. When viewing HDR, it peaks at 600 nits. In day-to-day office usage in a bright room, both displays will be sufficient. That being said, there's something next level about having the ability to crank the brightness up on the Pro Display XDR on a bright day and see whatever I'm working on with zero issues. To close the loop on the topic of brightness, HDR video editing is where the Pro Display XDR is next level and blows the ProArt display out of the water. If your use case is HDR video editing, then you can stop this video now because the XDR is the clear choice. When the specs are put next to each other, you can see where a lot of the engineering money goes. That being said, I don't think Asus is going after the niche HDR video editing crowd with this screen. It's ironic because the XDR has a very mild vignette effect, and the ProArt display has the exact opposite problem. While the XDR is slightly too dark at the edges, the ProArt display is slightly too bright, especially here at the top edge. Furthermore, the XDR has better brightness uniformity. While the whole XDR is consistent, the ProArt is noticeably brighter on the left side than on the right, and after prolonged use, combined with Lux Pixel, to be frank, it's disorienting and uncomfortable. For these reasons, I won't be keeping the ProArt display. The Lux Pixel is too aggressive or incorrectly applied, at least on my unit, and the brightness uniformity, or lack thereof, on the ProArt is a big issue for me. Speaking of engineering and research and development money, the ProArt display has a typical backlight mechanism, and as such, achieves a typical contrast ratio of 1500 to 1 and a max contrast ratio of 3000 to 1 in certain scenarios as noted on the spec sheet. It's not going to disappoint, but it's also not next level. The XDR achieves a contrast ratio of 1,000,000 to 1, thanks to its meticulously engineered 576 dimming zones. It is worth mentioning that in dimly lit rooms, you might notice a blooming effect on the XDR because there are, in quotes, only 576 dimming zones, and it's not an OLED screen where each pixel is its own backlight. But in my mind, this is a worthwhile compromise because there will never be burn-in on this screen. Setting the blooming issue aside, HDR videos look absolutely incredible, when side by side with the ProArt display, with perfect black levels on the XDR compared to the grayish hues on the ProArt. We'll talk about the panel surfaces in this chapter and talk a bit more about glossy versus matte screens. On the ProArt, it has a matte panel with Lux Pixel, which means it has an anti-glare textured finish and is not under a sheet of glass. This results in slightly muted colors and contrast, but less reflections on the screen if you have bright sources of light behind you. Long term, this is supposed to reduce eye fatigue if you have irregular lighting. A matte screen also hides smudges and dust better, and is easier to keep clean. With the XDR, I keep a microfiber cloth handy because not only is it a glossy screen, it has a glass sheet fused atop the panel. The glass can be more reflective, which is distracting in rooms where the light is unmanaged, and it attracts fingerprints and dust particles much more easily. That being said, the XDR has colors that pop and are vivid and come out at you through the screen, and the image feels more real. But we'll talk more about colors in this upcoming next chapter. The Pro Display is glossy, and the ProArt has a matte screen. That being said, colors look good on both displays. With both, you get rich, vibrant colors, just in subtle different ways. The ProArt feels like a color grader display that makes you feel in control. It feels like you find this display in a dimly lit photography studio or animator studio, touching up photos or editing cartoons frame by frame with a Wacom tablet and stylus. The Pro Display, on the other hand, has colors that pop and jump out at you through the glass and make you feel truly immersed in the experience. At risk of sounding too excited about a computer screen, next level is the phrase that best describes it. I've used the ProArt, the newest premium Dell 4K Thunderbolt display, and nothing comes close to the Pro Display XDR. Of course, you have to pay for that experience. I think Asus, due to its brightness uniformity issues, needs to keep improving its quality control and overall implementation of brightness on its newest screens. With the Pro Display XDR, the white point shifts blue if you look at any angle other than straight on. You do get used to this over time, but it does happen. With the ProArt display, the ProArt gets dimmer from angles, but does not shift blue as aggressively. Both tout viewing angles of 89 degrees from any direction. As mentioned, the Pro Display XDR has its white point shift blue when you view from different angles. The ProArt does not exhibit this issue, but has brightness uniformity issues. Shown on screen are the specs for those looking for numbers. I'm sure most people are familiar with how Mac displays work, but in case you're not, the Apple Studio Display and Pro Display XDR do not have buttons. They are simply connected with one cable, and then to adjust brightness and color settings, you use your Mac keyboard or the Settings app. I made a chapter to talk about this to recognize the wealth of controls Asus offers right on the monitor. On-screen menu controls are accessible via a button and joystick at the bottom of the screen, and you can set a reading mode, low blue light mode, adjust color, gamma, other display settings, and set color presets. It was obviously necessary to add these controls because Asus doesn't have that tight integration with PCs that you might connect to the ProArt 6K, but they are a welcome addition in case you want quick access to these controls or in case you connect a device that doesn't support communicating with the display settings over the display cable. Asus also offers an app that lets you do all of the adjusting from your Mac if you don't feel like using on-screen controls. Big positive. The design is an obvious place where a lot of the money was also spent on the XDR. It's been out for 6 years now, so I won't spend too much time on this. The Pro Display has an aluminum frame with a glass front, a solid, expensive-feeling machined stand, and that signature cutout design, which looks and feels ultra-premium. The ProArt has a signature slim, frameless ProArt design, with a plastic body and matte screen, and the stand is sturdy and reliable, but the cutout on the stand for the wires is too low, just like on the Dell 4K Thunderbolt screen. Some people complain about the plastic on the monitor, and yeah, the solid machined metal is better, but the plastic doesn't detract substantially from the monitor usage experience for me. However, the Pro Display XDR looks much more premium when you're looking at the screen from any other angle than the front. Both displays offer Mac integration. Both displays support brightness controls via the keyboard. The Pro Display is deeply integrated. The ProArt display has an M model P3 preset mode which aligns the ProArt display colors with macOS devices, which is huge because most screens don't perfectly match your MacBook screen colors, unlike this ProArt, which solves that issue. Both displays have Thunderbolt, but the Pro Display has Thunderbolt 3 and has to be at the end of a daisy chain of devices, whereas the ProArt has Thunderbolt 4 and can daisy chain more devices. The ProArt takes the cake in terms of I/O. It has 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports with 96 watts of power delivery on the main port, 1 DisplayPort 1.4 with display stream compression, 1 HDMI 2.1, 2 Type-A ports, 2 Type-C ports, a headphone jack, a built-in auto KVM switch, and picture-by-picture and picture-in-picture support. This is great to have input-output options on your main monitor. I personally am not an avid user of the ports on backs of monitors, but there have been situations where I needed them in a pinch, and the option to have multiple inputs into the ProArt is a big win for Asus in my book. The Pro Display has USB-C ports on the back, but because it uses Thunderbolt 3, the 6K resolution consumes most of the bandwidth, and those USB-C ports on the back run at USB 2 speeds, which is only useful for basic input-output or a simple webcam. Both displays have rotatability and can be rotated 90 degrees. Both have sturdy, reliable stands. The ProArt has a bit more adjustability because it can be swiveled, whereas the Pro Display XDR stand cannot. And here are the adjustability specs for both displays on screen now. The The Pro Display XDR has a bit more tilt range, but requires an accessory to be VESA mounted, whereas the ProArt by Asus has VESA mount holes built in. That being said, the Apple Pro Display has an easy-to-use, engineered mechanism that lets you swap where the screen is mounted, without tools, mostly, quickly and easily. The Asus ProArt 6K has a Kensington lock, whereas the Pro Display does not have an anti-theft mechanism built in, and these are sold separately as kits for roughly $150. A big win for the Asus is that it is fully compatible with Windows laptops natively, and offers on-screen controls, so it's not a headache to set it up. The Pro Display XDR can be used with a compatible Thunderbolt 4 laptop, but requires messing with Boot Camp drivers to get brightness adjustability working. The XDR, with a stand included, comes in at $6,000 before tax, whereas the ProArt display was $1,399 at the time of the making of this video. For roughly 20% of the cost, you get about 50% of the value offered by the XDR. Although if you need HDR editing or prefer a vibrant, glossy panel, there's really no other option currently other than the XDR. I just wanted to quickly mention and acknowledge OLED monitors. While they're getting better every day, I stick by my words in another video I made about the shortcomings of OLED. If you're going to display taskbar or dock or menu bar every day on an OLED screen, you will get burn-in. Therefore, I'm very glad that manufacturers are still investing in IPS, mini LED, micro LED, quantum dot displays, and other technologies that don't sacrifice reliability for progress. I might be in the minority, but I'll gladly pay more for an expensive IPS screen than buy a new OLED screen every year to 2 years. There are things that you can do to mitigate burn-in, but at the end of the day, performing those measures and workarounds gets in the way of actually doing your work and actually being productive. Overall, it's great that companies other than Apple are trying to make 6K displays more affordable, especially because you might want 6K resolution and color accuracy without wanting to pay for the brightness, contrast, or HDR capabilities, or 576 dimming zones and a solid machined stand. I love all of the connectivity and port options and modern features that the 6K ProArt display includes. I love that it's more affordable than an XDR. While I'm glad that they released the ProArt 6K, and looking at what it can do, there are obviously still things it can't do that the Pro Display XDR does that goes above and beyond. All this said, I don't think the ProArt is intended to compete directly with Apple, but rather slide in at a more affordable price point while still delivering solid value.